Hello and welcome back. In this session of contemporary Indian philosophy, we focus on Mahatma Gandhi. Political and economic ideas of Mahatma Gandhi. In the present world, full of hatred, inequalities, discrimination, human degradation and erosion of values, there is an imperative need to recapitulate and apply the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. When the world is becoming more and more corrupt and inhuman day by day, the interpretations of Gandhian thought and perspective need to be reiterated constantly. For Gandhi, the modern age was the age of politics, as almost all aspects of individual and social life were directly organized and administered by it. Gandhi was not a politician in the normal sense. He was essentially a religious man, but got dragged into politics because of his great concern for his fellow beings. According to him, no Indian who aspires to follow the way of true religion can afford to remain aloof from politics. In other words, one who aspires to a truly religious life cannot fail to undertake public service as his mission, and we are today so much caught up in the political machine that service of the people is impossible without taking part in politics. Politics in Gandhi's view consisted in revitalizing the Indian society by working in villages, fighting against local injustice, helping people to acquire courage and self-respect and building up their organized strength. His political philosophy encompasses an assortment of elements stemming from his basic humanistic outlook. He envisioned a truly non-violent society which would be federally constituted and composed of small, self-governing and relatively self-sufficient village communities relying largely on moral and social pressures to contain crime. According to him, the spirit of democracy cannot be imposed. It has to come from within. His conception of ideal social order is decentralized. Cooperative commonwealth based on the rights, dignity and freedom of the individual. Therefore, the political philosophy of Gandhi included his concepts of democracy, political decentralization through village republic, Ramarajya, spiritualizing politics, Satyagraha as weapon of non-violence. Satyagraha, the technique of truth and ahimsa. Satyagraha is the heart and soul of Gandhism. The idea and practice of Satyagraha is Gandhi's unique contribution to political thought. It is described as the relentless pursuits to truthful ends by non-violent means. It is the weapon of the non-violent struggle. It is an ideal weapon for the war of righteousness and in essence is the introduction of truth in political life. It is a direct corollary of truth and non-violence. It is the way in which ahimsa is implemented or put into action. In it, there is always unflinching adherence to truth and our inner voice, which is the voice of truth and justice. Gandhi was aware that a theoretical emphasis on the value and importance of truth and non-violence would lead us nowhere unless we put it into practice. This feeling took him to develop a technique of truth and ahimsa, which he named Satyagraha. Satyagraha is a synthesis of Sanskrit words satya or truth, agraha insistence or holding firmly to. Hence, the literal meaning of the word Satyagraha is insistence on truth or holding firm to truth. The concept of Satyagraha gave practical expression to the religious and ethical ideal of truth and non-violence. As the technique of ahimsa, it put the ideal of non-violence into practice and was informed by the spirit of truth. This, if translated into English, it means truth force or a soul force or love force. It forged a bond between his actions and his basic beliefs concerning the nature of man and the nature of reality. His religious and metaphysical beliefs concerning truth or God, the soul or Atman and the essential unity of all existence were given existential expression through the principle of Satyagraha. Gandhi kept experimenting with this technique throughout his life. This new method of Satyagraha, according to Gandhi, would activate soul, mobilize its enormous latent energy and generate a new kind of spiritual power. Gandhi's revolutionary techniques to address social and political conflict have drawn considerable attention from the international community. Referred to as Satyagraha, these principles have been described as Gandhi's distinctive contribution to the field of conflict resolution. Thus, it is the method adopted by Gandhi for bringing about social change involving conflict that cannot be addressed through available means of persuasion. It is Gandhi's invaluable contribution for resolving conflicts in society and a step forward in the direction of social reconstruction. Satyagraha is based on moral force, the force of truth and justice, the force of self-purification and self-suffering, love and service, courage and discipline. Therefore, the entire gamut of the philosophy of Satyagraha is based on the fact that truth, ahimsa and morality alone can be victorious, and we cannot adopt immoral principle to create a moral society. Techniques of Satyagraha. Gandhi compared Satyagraha to a banyan tree in which Satya or truth and Ahimsa or non-violence together represent the parent trunk with innumerable branches like non-cooperation, civil disobedience, direct action, fasting, economic boycott, strike, dharna, picketing, non-payment of tax, etc. All these techniques were not equally favored by Gandhi. The forms of Satyagraha that Gandhi favored most were civil disobedience, non-cooperation, direct action, fasting and boycott. The technique of Satyagraha thus employs methods to be used in successive stages and many of them simultaneously. Civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is a protest against unjust laws. It is an active, strong and extreme form of Satyagraha. Gandhi defines it as the breach of immoral statutory enactment. He seems to be influenced by Thoreau in this regard, and accordingly he feels that it is morally proper to be right and true than to be law abiding. It is a powerful and peaceful substitute to an armed revolt. Non-cooperation. It is the withdrawal of all support from the unjust ruling power. It is a protest against unwilling participation in evil acts. Gandhi admittedly learnt the technique of non-violent non-cooperation from Leo Tolstoy. Non-cooperation, according to Gandhi, is essentially a cleansing process. It affects the Satyagrahi more than the party and is able to give to the Satyagrahi power to face evil and to endure suffering. It is using love for the redressal of wrongs. Its objective is not to punish the enemy, but to change him through humanitarian service. Direct action. Gandhi considered it inevitable for Satyagraha to become assertive when non-cooperation alone did not work. It took on the form of an open and mass rebellion. Although the word rebellion has association with violent ways, direct action is essentially non-violent. It is direct in the sense that there is no secret about it. The best example for this kind of Satyagraha is the Quit India call given by Gandhi in 1942. Boycott. Another method of Satyagraha as advocated by Gandhi was the boycott of economic, social, political, educational, legal and other institutions with the object of lodging a protest against and putting pressure on the opposition in order to seek redressal of grievances. It is a sort of punishment and is conceived in a vindictive spirit. Economic boycott is implied in the war of Swadeshi. It implies the boycott of commodities produced anywhere else but locally. Fasting. This is the most effective form of Satyagraha according to Gandhi. It works in two ways. It aims at self-purification, and by choosing death over injustice, it can mend even the most obstinate of opponents. This is a weapon which depends mainly upon the sole force of the person wielding it, and Gandhi himself used this weapon very successfully. Thus, Gandhi's Satyagraha is a powerful, novel and predominantly moral method of social change. It is the most powerful and permanent weapon to solve political, economic as well as religious problems. Gandhi demonstrated how non-violent Satyagraha can resolve individual and natural conflict. It was the best alternative for the peaceful resolution of disputes and conflicts. Satyagraha as an ideal and as a weapon of conflict resolution will always be a great inspiration for generations to come. Gram Swaraj or Village Republic, Gandhian views on democracy. The ideal government, according to Gandhi, is a democratic one. He wanted to emphasize the principle of non-violence and the actual working of democracy. The governing principle of his ideal state of Sarvodaya is non-violence, and he considered every form of violence as evil. Political power, which belongs to the state, is a kind of organized violence because it harms humanity by destroying individuality, which forms the basis for all progress. The state for Gandhi represents violence in its concentrated form. but it is necessary since human beings are social by nature. Gandhi favored the idea of decentralization, which guards the individual's freedom. He wanted to decentralize the entire political structure. The ideal society, in his opinion, would be a decentralized one, giving ample scope for self-development. In fact, his Swaraj meant self-government. He uses the term Swaraj to mean positive freedom, to participate in the process of politics in every way possible rather than to conceive of the state as a negative institution that restricts activities to a bare minimum. Gandhi wanted India to be ruled according to Swaraj or self-rule, in which the government was run by the consent of the people. Swaraj implied participatory democracy. It is no doubt that in a popular democratic government, the majority view has to be the basis of practical application. But the majority should always try their best to pay attention to the interests of the minorities, and they in turn should be able to fight for their legitimate demands. Thus, to safeguard the interests of the minorities, Gandhi resorted to the system of political decentralization through Panchayati Raj or village republics. Gandhi's belief in the primacy of the individual led him to conceptualize a truly non-violent state composed of self-governing and self-sufficient village communities which were based on majority rule. Here, everyone would have the right to engage in acts of civil disobedience against policies that were contrary to what one considered morally right. He wanted to establish political organization in the country on a non-violent basis through village communities. He wanted to make every village a unit free and active for the universal good. On the eve of Indian independence in 1947, Gandhi said, "Independence must begin at the bottom." Thus, every village will be a republic or panchayat having full powers. It follows, therefore, that every village has to be self-sustained and capable of managing its affairs, even to the extent of defending itself against the whole world. He recommended village republics as the ideal form of a decentralized political and social system. He said that the ideal system which can give maximum opportunity for individual initiative and growth is the panchayat system. In this structure, every village was an independent republic with full powers. This implied that the village has to be an economically self-sufficient, politically sovereign and socially homogeneous republic, capable of managing its own affairs. The governing of the villages was to be conducted by a body of 5 persons annually elected by the adult villagers. This body of persons would consist of men and women possessing necessary educational qualifications. These elected people would constitute the village government. Gandhi wrote, "The government of the village will be conducted by the panchayat of 5 persons, annually elected by adult villagers, male and females possessing minimum prescribed qualifications. They will have all the authority and jurisdiction required. This panchayat will be its legislature, judiciary and executive combined to be operated for its year of office." Here, there is perfect democracy based on individual freedom. The village government or panchayat would formulate their rules and regulations for smooth and effective running of things. It will be a system based on love, truth, non-violence and moral sense. This would be a system of perfect democracy because this will ensure complete individual liberty and promote individual initiative. Gandhi's Panchayat Raj was based on democratic decentralization in which all the units of administration had to be the equal shareholders and the dictation by the higher bodies was not allowed. Gandhi's dream of village Swaraj or Panchayati Raj is still a far cry as we are still under the rule of a top-heavy structure and the villages are yet to have their due share in economic and political power and authority which Gandhi had advocated and fought for. Ramarajya, Gandhian concept of true democracy. In a disciplined and enlightened democracy, every man and woman should be able to decide what to do and what not to do. All decisions will be made by the people's free will. Under democracy, individual liberty of opinion and action are zealously guarded. Gandhi's concept of a non-violent society was based on the principles of democracy such that every citizen is treated equally, free to express his views and make decisions pertaining to the governance of the state. If the state is coercive and repressive, the people will use the method of non-violent, non-cooperation to resist. Gandhi frequently used to convey the concept of democracy by referring to his own concept of Ramarajya, wherein sovereignty of the people is based on moral authority. Here, equal rights of the rich and the poor are ensured. The weakest man can rise to his fullest moral height, and all religions are equally respected. By Ramarajya, Gandhi does not mean Hindu Raj. For him, it meant the kingdom of God on earth, as Ram was not merely a king but God. The ancient ideal of Ramarajya is undoubtedly one of the true democracy in which the meanest citizen could be sure of swift justice without an elaborate and costly procedure. Even the dog is described by the poet to have received justice under Ramarajya. He made it clear that Ramarajya ensures equal rights to all, prince and pauper alike. Economic thoughts of Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi was not an economist in its academic sense of the term, and he did not produce a treatise on the economic system which he visualized for India. In some of his general works, lectures, letters or editorials in Young India and Harijan, he made references to the economic system which he considered to be ideal for the country. Gandhian economic ideals were in a sense a logical corollary of his political and moral principles such as Swaraj, Sarvodaya, truth and non-violence. To an extent, we can say that his entire life and philosophy were based on truth and non-violence, dignity of labor and simplicity. Gandhi derived his ideas for an economic system based on these wider social principles. Economic concepts for him were to be laden with ethical considerations, and these ethics should not be devoid of relevancy to our daily life. In Gandhian economic thought, we find that great significance has been attached to spiritual and moral values rather than to material and economic values. He asserted that man and life are more important than money. One principle which played a significant role in Gandhi's life was simple living and high thinking. On the basis of this, we can say that Gandhi's important economic ideals include trusteeship, Swadeshi, bread labor, economic decentralization, etc. Economic decentralization. Gandhi has advocated economic decentralization as the technique of nonviolent democracy. He visualized a decentralized economic policy where there would be no exploitation in the economic field. In the economic field, Gandhi was in favor of production by masses rather than mass production. He wanted to bring about the decentralization of economic power in the form of self-sufficient and self-governing village communities. Gandhi's aim for supporting decentralization of economic power is to serve the interest of all people, leading to a Sarvodaya economic order. He finds this a solution to all the modern ills like unlimited violence, economic exploitation, arbitrary state power, removal of poverty and socio-economic inequalities. Bread labor. The Gandhian economic program was based upon the ideal of self-sufficiency. Man for him was the ultimate consideration, and he believed that the economic good of all lies in strictly practicing the principles of Sarvodaya economic order. The doctrine of labor occupies an important place in Gandhi's Sarvodaya economic order. He introduced the theory of bread labor, which means that everyone should contribute towards earning his or her bread. The idea came to Gandhi through various influences, such as the writings of Tolstoy and Ruskin, along with suggestions made in the Bible and in the Gita. The Bible says, "Earn thy bread by the sweat, by the brow." And the Gita says, "He who eats without laboring for it eats stolen bread." Gandhi said, "If all labored for their bread and no more, then there would be enough food leisure for all. There would be no cry of overpopulation, no disease and no such misery as we see around. Such labor will be the highest form of sacrifice." Gandhi felt that this idea could also be useful in bringing about a feeling of equality among the members of a society. By bread labor, Gandhi meant that in order to live, man must work. It is essential for every man to realize the dignity of labor. Gandhi was of the firm opinion that the adoption of bread labor by one and all as a necessary value of life would pave the way for the establishment of a classless and casteless society. He was sure that the distinctions of rank would be abolished when everyone without exception acknowledged the obligation of bread labor. To Gandhi, everyone is born to work for a common good of all. He was convinced that if people realized the value and necessity of practicing the ideal of bread labor in their life, there would never be any shortage of bread or cloth in the world. Mere intellectual labor was not compensation or a substitute for physical labor. He clarifies, "Let me not be misunderstood. I do not discount the value of intellectual labor, but no amount of it is any compensation for bodily labor which every one of us is born to give for the common good for all." Gandhi wanted to stop the mad craze for white collar jobs and check the feeling of condemnation towards physical labor. The rich who multiply their wants without offering manual labor exploit the poor, using them as a means for gratification of their wants. When the rich start laboring, they will be able to empathize with the millions of laborers. Man cannot develop his mind simply by writing, reading or making speeches. Gandhi believes in the 8 hours of a day of honest and clear labor. He did not encourage the giving out of free meals, as he thought it encouraged laziness and idleness. He called it a misplaced charity. Instead, he strongly recommended the organizing institution to arrange for some honest work before the meals are served to the poor. One may ask that mental work is also work or labor, and why a person doing mental work also should do manual work. Gandhi says that such an attitude causes social distinctions to arise because people doing mental work consider themselves superior to persons who do physical work. But if the person engaged in mental work also sweeps and cleans or does some other things like spinning or gardening, the distinctions would vanish because the work of cleaning or sweeping would then not be considered inferior. Also, by doing manual work, one would also be able to keep his body fit. However, there is one condition attached to bread labor, that is, everyone must take to bread labor voluntarily. There is no question of compulsion. Compulsory bread labor is a state of slavery. It breeds poverty, disease and discontentment. On the other hand, willing bread labor brings contentment and health. Gandhi felt that the conflict between labor and capital can be eliminated only when everyone takes to some useful physical labor voluntarily. He held that agriculture, spinning, weaving, carpentry, etc., which are connected with some primary needs, will flourish if all participate. Our wants will be reduced and it will lead to an increase in production also. These two will reduce scarcity and help to solve many problems faced by our country. Trusteeship. Gandhi believed in the dignity of man. It is from this deep feeling of spirituality that Gandhi derived his ethico-economic theory of trusteeship. For him, everything belongs to God and comes from God. Trusteeship as a method stands for socializing everything. When an individual has more than his proportionate portion, he becomes a trustee of that portion of God's property. The rich should utilize the surplus wealth for the benefit of society at large. Gandhi claims that trusteeship is a peaceful way of liquidating class conflict. He regarded trusteeship not simply as an economic system, but as a socio-political economic arrangement against the inequality of capitalism and the centralization of power in socialism. Through it, Gandhi sought to abolish capitalism to an even greater degree than proposed by the communists. He felt that social reorganization through non-violent means could be achieved by persuading the rich to hand over their wealth and possessions to society. Trusteeship could thus be the way for the socialization of wealth and property. It exhorts each individual to give up his right on the portion of wealth and property which is in excess for his requirement according to his social circumstances. It seeks to abolish the private ownership of the means of productions, not only by the extermination of haves by have-nots, but by making them cooperate with each other for the larger interest of society. We see that this theory is based on the divine spirituality of man. The economic equality of Gandhi's conception does not mean that everyone would literally have the same amount of money. It means that each must have enough for his or her needs. Gandhi suggested the cultivation of a spirit of detachment from wealth and utilization for oneself, only a portion for meeting one's legitimate needs and earning an honorable livelihood. In fact, renunciation is inherent in human nature. That spirit of renunciation is converted into trusteeship. When people living in the midst of their wealth use it in the service of mankind, The principle of trusteeship is not renunciation of holding, but renunciation while holding properties. Thus, the rich man will have possession of his wealth and use what he reasonably requires for his personal needs, but will remain a trustee for the rest, which will be used for the welfare of society. Here, trusteeship offers a practical solution to the problem of inequality in human society. The idea of trusteeship system is the most original contribution of Gandhi to economic thought. He wanted to the rich class to become the trustees of the nation and to run their business for the welfare of the people. In this, the honesty of the trustee is assumed. He has to realize that the wealth he possesses does not belong to him. What belongs to him is the right to an honorable livelihood, no better than that enjoyed by millions. The rest of his wealth belongs to the community and must be used for its welfare. Thus, it is apparent that Gandhi's doctrine of trusteeship is based on a sense of morality and love. This doctrine is nothing but a sincere working out of the doctrine of non-possession. The rich also must be made to realize through a loving process the merit of non-possession. A critic of Gandhi might say that this doctrine is based on the assumption of honesty on the part of the rich. This is, however, no criticism of Gandhi, whose beliefs are based on the presupposition that every man is inwardly good. He has tried to demonstrate this in various ways, and he does not want to exclude the capitalist from that. Even they are good people, their good sense just has to be aroused. If the rich do not voluntarily agree to use their riches for the welfare of the community, Gandhi suggests that the people may resort to the method of non-cooperation to make them fall in line with the wishes of the community and become trustees of their possessions in the true sense of the term. Thus, trusteeship is a novel, non-violent method propounded by Gandhi to bring about economic equality in society. Swadeshi. Gandhi realized that much of the heart-rending poverty of the masses in India is due to the ruinous departure from Swadeshi in the economic life. His thought was that India would not have been poor if the articles of consumption had not been brought from outside India. The broad meaning if Swadeshi is the use of all homemade things to the exclusion of foreign things. Gandhi believed that the economic good of lies in strictly practicing the principles of Swadeshi. Swadeshi is a doctrine employed for the protection of the home industry. According to Manmohan Chowdhury, the principle of Swadeshi is a fundamental concept in Gandhian economic thought. It defines the relation of individual to his society and the larger world in terms of socially responsible economic behavior. Thus, the practice of Swadeshi would result in innumerable self-supporting and self-contained units meeting their primary needs locally and exchange with other units such necessary commodities that are not locally producible. Gandhi would be prepared to buy goods from any part of the world if they were required for the growth of his country, but he would insist on the use of Swadeshi when such foreign things were found to hamper the economic status of the home industry. Swadeshi thus is not an outright rejection of everything foreign. It is based on a feeling of concern for the economic and political stability of one's own country. The concept of Swadeshi comprises of the following thoughts. The first being the reduction of wants by each individual consumer. The second, the reordering of preferences in such a way that it is made up mainly of goods produced in the neighborhood. And the third is the cooperation of the consumer with his neighborhood producer to make them work effectively. Swadeshi is one of the best ways of preventing the manufacture of goods in abundance. If a person wishes to increase his business so as to supply the needs of others who do not belong to that unit, he will find that no one else would be willing to buy his goods to a moral responsibility towards his neighbors. Thus, he would be prevented from developing into a large-scale manufacturer. Even if the articles produced elsewhere are more attractive than those produced locally, they will not be allowed to flood out of the local products. At the same time, the local producer is encouraged to improve the quality of his products to come up to the standard of foreign goods. Thus, the consumers need to limit themselves to and help to improve the quality of local products. However, he was not totally against industries and technology. In fact, He wanted a balanced growth of villages as well as cities and small scale and big industries to form a harmonious, peaceful society. He wanted a free economy from greed, and he wanted to construct an exploitation-free society as per his concept of Swadeshi. To conclude, we can say Swadeshi from its economic point is a belief in a self-reliant economy. It is a warning against the killing of native skills and putting the nation in the trap set by foreigners. It permits taking the help of another for building one's own economy, but with great caution. Thus, the Gandhian concept of Swadeshi from an economic point of view stands for strong belief in self-reliance, balanced growth and human economics. That is, the economics for a larger and more meaningful life and not the economics for profit and market. The political philosophy of Gandhi included his concept of democracy, political decentralization through village republics or Panchayati Raj, Ramarajya, Satyagraha as a weapon of non-violence, etc. Satyagraha is described by Gandhi as a force against violence, tyranny and injustice. Truth, ahimsa and self-suffering are the three tenets that form the basis of Satyagraha. Instead of letting power be concentrated in the hands of the state, Gandhi pleaded for decentralization. The ideal society, according to him, would be decentralized, one giving ample scope for self-development. He saw panchayats as a perfect democracy based upon individual freedom and his ideal of village Swaraj. The individual was the architect of his own government. Gandhi's views are especially relevant in the present society when we are faced with the evils of centralization of powers. Decentralization of power is needed to bring the decision process closer to people in a large democratic country like India. Gandhi was an apostle of non-violence, and his economics may thus be called the economics of non-violence. Bread labor was essential for those who followed a life of truth and non-violence, as these principles preclude every private profit. He aimed at establishing a classless society through his doctrine of trusteeship. The basic principle of Swadeshi is to produce for commerce, market or profits. From all these concepts, we can conclude that ethical considerations in economic behavior assume importance in Gandhian thought. Now, let us try to answer the following questions. Explain the concept of bread labor as developed by Gandhi. Elucidate Gandhi's theory of trusteeship. Briefly explain the Gandhian notion of Swadeshi. What are the principles and applications of Satyagraha? Write a note on Gandhian concept of Ramarajya. Here are some books for reference. The Philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi by D.M. Datta, University of Calcutta in 1968. Gandhian Theory of Social Reconstruction, Parameshwari Dayal, Atlantic Publishers, New Delhi, 2006. Sarvodaya and Freedom, a Gandhian Appraisal, K.M. Ratnam Chetty, Discovery Publishing House, New Delhi, 1991. Here we come to the end of the session. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye.